Please turn to page 144 for content vocabulary diagrams. The reason why I'm starting on page 144 is a reminder of where content vocabulary diagrams belong in the instructional program. And that is when you are studying a core subject, science, social studies, anything in your language arts, any of your core subjects, you will begin a unit of study where most of your children will probably have little or no knowledge of a subject matter. That's that no knowledge part of instruction, where you will be the teacher, will be the giver of the information. If you notice on the opposing page, there's the knowledge. That's when the students are the givers of information. So basically, when you're working in a unit of study, and we'll focus on science since that's what we're doing in our example today, your students may begin with this whole unit and not have very much background, so they need to learn the information through you using lecture notes, content vocabulary diagrams, as well as reading, and that could be from the text, from passages, essays, also going to online sources, videos, in order to learn more information. We're looking at the content vocabulary diagrams as our lesson today for when children do not have the knowledge and we need to give them knowledge. And this is specifically so that they can focus on vocabulary. Let's turn to page 148 so I can walk you through the steps of a content vocabulary diagram. On page 148, you see the descriptive organizer, hand signs, and definition for that organizer. That's because content vocabulary diagrams will end up becoming descriptive writing. The whole purpose of this activity is twofold. First of all, we want to keep our children at grade level in content. And in order to do that, this activity is going to focus on vocabulary. It is essential in our content areas that students have a grasp on the topical vocabulary. That is the content vocabulary, words that are specific to that unit of study. So in science, if I'm studying about plants, my students will need to know what epidermis, chlorophyll, photosynthesis. These are specific vocabulary words that they need to understand and be able to use so that they can discuss and eventually write about, and in this case, plants. So content vocabulary is part of that front-loading activity that students need in order to learn their vocabulary that's specific to their subject matter. When we're learning that content vocabulary, the problem is that we do not want to teach that in lists where the children are going to have that vocabulary word, chlorophyll, go and find a definition and write the definition next to it. Research shows us that that is not an effective way for students to master vocabulary. And when we talk about this content vocabulary, the best way for students to learn those words as well as to master them so that they can speak and write with those words is to associate them with the content. So that means that we are going to have some sort of a drawing, a visual image that is going to represent the meaning of the content. So in our example today, the vocabulary words are vocabulary words that deal with the layers of the leaf in a plant and all those different parts of that plant. If that's the case, then what's my visual drawing going to be of the layers of the leaf of the plant? If I was in earth science and we were studying about volcanoes and the children need to know the content vocabulary, specific vocabulary words about volcanoes, then we would probably draw a volcano and then we would put our vocabulary words on that visual representation. So when you're doing this activity, you need to have a visual representation of the content. Then we're going to label that visual with the vocabulary words. Staying at grade level means that we need to have a mastery of content vocabulary, and that's what this activity will do. But it's twofold. It will also focus on writing. And in this case, the writing instruction is specifically for students to understand the steps to write a description. Why is a description important? Descriptions are unique, and the reason for that is when students are writing papers, and most especially at your grade levels, they're going to start writing essays. And in their essays, let's look at our organizer. They're going to have an introduction, they're going to have a body, and a conclusion. We're going to go back up here to the introduction. The introduction in an essay could have 1 to 2 paragraphs typically. If there's 2 paragraphs, that's because the reader needs a description of the subject. So let me give you an example. Let's look at something very common, and that is how to use a coffee maker. Let's say that I was writing to an audience that had no idea what a coffee maker was. Well, in my introduction, I would need to have a description of that coffee maker. Then in the body, I would have the steps of how to make coffee from that coffee maker. So what is descriptive writing in informative explanatory text? When the reader needs background before you can actually get into the information that you're trying to tell them about. So if they don't know what a coffee maker is, I have to give you background. I have to describe a coffee maker, tell you about all its parts, the function of its parts. Now that you know that, you can read the essay and understand it. But if you didn't know what a coffee maker was, and I started telling you the steps of how to make coffee, you would be lost as a reader. The whole reason and purpose for descriptions in informative explanatory writing is to provide readers with a visual image of the subject that you are going to tell information about. And in that visual image, you will find most of the time you are packing that visual image with content vocabulary because that vocabulary is specific to that subject. So we have our students staying at grade level by using this activity to teach vocabulary, specifically content vocabulary, connected to a visual representation of the subject that we are learning about. That is going to help the children learn the words, store it in their brain with that visual representation, and when are they going to use those words? When they are dealing with that content. So they'll be able to retrieve those words using that visual representation and find those words in their brain so that they can remember what they mean. That is a highly effective way to comprehend and master and flexibly use vocabulary that is content-based vocabulary. And at the same time through this activity, students are going to learn how to write descriptions so that later in their essays, if they need them to provide background to their reader, they can embed them into their essays. That's the purpose for our writing. Let's go back up here to the top to our little box, our visual. We're going to start off by making an organizer. And when we make that organizer, we're going to draw 1, 2 lines so that we have our introduction, body, conclusion. After we have our introduction, body, conclusion, we'll start off with our introduction where we will have our big idea. Notice the big idea is not SS light bulb. It's subject, equal sign, and then a line. And that means that this is more of a definition or a big picture of what we're going to describe. You can start off with either type of sentence. So our big idea sentence is subject, equal sign, line, meaning subject, who or what are we writing about? And in this case, we're going to say a leaf. And then we are going to say is, or has, or are. Leaves are the parts of a plant. Or we could say a leaf has 4 layers. A leaf is a part of a plant that has 4 layers. This is our subject, and this is the big picture or definition. That's how we're going to start off our description. Then in the middle, we'll have our description, and at the end, we'll repeat this big idea using different words. As we walk through this activity, grab a blank sheet of paper, have it in the portrait position. When you're teaching this to your students, they all will have a blank sheet of paper at their desk. I recommend that you have a blank sheet of paper underneath the document viewer. While you are filling in your organizer and explaining the information, They will be recording that on their own organizers and orally repeating what you're saying. And not like parrots. You're giving the information, you're talking about it, and together you and the students will then review your notes and orally rehearse the information on your notes. And as you do that, you will also try to have physical motions to accompany this oral rehearsal so that you're using all the learning modalities. Let's start our content vocabulary diagram. You have your blank sheet of paper. You're going to tell the students, boys and girls, we are studying about plants. This week, we will go into a part of a plant, a leaf, at great detail. And in order to understand the parts of a leaf and how important all those layers in a leaf are, you need to understand the vocabulary associated to a leaf. So today's lesson, we are going to learn the vocabulary words in order to learn more about the specific part of a plant known as a leaf. And when we're learning this vocabulary, we're also going to learn how to write a description. So this activity is going to teach us vocabulary words specific to our plants unit, as well as teach us how to write a description. When we're writing our description, we need to first of all get organized. And that means we need an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. Always those three parts. What do we need? Introduction, body, conclusion. In order to make our organizer, what do? We draw 1, 2 lines. Let's draw our 2 lines on our paper. As you can see, we have our 1, 2 lines that we draw out to our students. And the top part of this organizer is going to be the introduction. And because it's a description, what is going to be in our introduction? Introduction, definition. Body. What are we going to do in the body? Draw a picture, label the parts, and tell the function of the parts. What are we going to do? Draw a picture, label the parts, and tell the function of the parts. And what's the function? What it is, how it works, why it's important, what it does. Let's go to the conclusion. What do we have in the conclusion? Repeat the definition, but use different words. Up in the top then we know we'll have a definition. The body is where we'll describe our subject, and the bottom will repeat the definition using different words. There's our organizer. Up at the top, subject. S is for subject. Who or what is this description going to be about? A leaf. Equal sign. Define that leaf. Oh, a leaf is a part of a plant with 4 layers. Okay, let's fill that in. What do we have for our subject? A leaf. What did we have for our equal sign? Is made up of many layers. So we have our introduction on the top here. Our leaf is our subject. Then we have our equal sign. Define what a leaf is. We came up with a leaf is made up of many layers. Notice there's a variety of different ways that you can make a definition for your opening sentence. I also want to show you, instead of writing a leaf is made up of many layers, I could have just had simple icons. I could have drawn a leaf, and then after the equal sign, I could have drawn some lines for layers. It really doesn't matter. But the more that you make simple icons and key words, the easier it is for the students to stay with you in the lesson instead of going into the copying mode. I wanted to show both of these examples here just because sometimes having that first sentence written out helps students begin their descriptions. So you decide what your students need. If they need that first one written out just to begin the description, or if you could just have a couple of key icons and they can form that description easily on their own, that's fine as well. It's just giving you some differentiated type of instruction to meet the needs of your students. We have the introduction and we're defining our subject. Who or what is this about? A leaf, and what about a leaf has many layers. So let's go back and let's read our paper. A leaf has many layers. A leaf is made up of many layers. Maybe we could say a leaf is the part of a plant and it has many layers. So look what we're doing. I'm going back, I'm orally rehearsing it, I'm adding information. So this is when you can, through oral rehearsal, add more to a sentence, delete, switch information around until it sounds how you want to write it. And that's important to model to the students. You're not going to have perfect writing when you're first putting your ideas down. That's why we go back and orally rehearse it, so we can keep saying it over and over until it makes sense and it sounds the best. All right, we have our introduction. Let's head to the body. The body is a description of the leaf. And when we say a description of the leaf, how do we plan that description? We use our hand sign for a description to help us remind how to fill out the body. So we put up our hand like it's the sheet of paper that we're planning on, and we do this. Draw a picture, label the parts, and tell the function of the parts. Can we add descriptive words to it? Absolutely, because we're describing. So let's go back and do that. Draw a picture, label the parts, add fancy words, then tell the function of the parts. We'll go back now, and we need to draw a picture of the leaf and its layers. This is not going to be an art project. It's going to be a fast sketch. Let's draw that picture. When you're drawing the picture of the leaf, you'll start discussing, oh, here's our first layer. This is going to be the cuticle. It's kind of hard and waxy. We'll come back and label that. Oh, let's make the middle. Let's make these circles here because there's air in between, and then these circles, you'll find out what those are in a few minutes. So you're drawing and you're just discussing the different parts at a very simple level. So we drew a picture of the leaf. What are we doing next? Labeling the parts. Here's our vocabulary words. This is when those content vocabulary words are going to be introduced into our description. Here we labeled our vocabulary on the layers of the leaf. We wrote cuticle, we're pointing to the top, epidermis, the layer underneath that cuticle, the air space, here's the mesophyll cell, then we drew little circles, and those little circles, we're drawing a line down here, are our chloroplasts, the little pockets that hold, and then we wrote chlorophyll. So we wrote each vocabulary word down, circled it, and drew a line to the visual representation, to that part of the picture that represented that vocabulary word. And we just discussed those different vocabulary words and how they fit into the picture, but at a very simple level. At this point, the students are starting to understand all the parts of the leaf at a very simple level, are relating vocabulary words to those parts of the leaf. So we drew the picture, labeled the parts. Next, we're going to go back and tell the function of the parts. And that means that we're going to draw drop boxes below the different vocabulary words or terms. We will fill in the drop boxes telling the function of these words. What's the function of the epidermis? What's the function of the cuticle? And when we tell the function of it, that means how it works, what it does, why it's important, and finally, what is it? That's the function of that vocabulary word. So you would choose one of these ways to explain what those words mean. Let's fill in the function of each vocabulary word. So we started up at the cuticle, and we not only told the function, we added some descriptive words there. Hard, waxy, keeps the moisture in. The next layer is the epidermis. It is a stiff wall that keeps the moisture also in the plant. Then we went to the guard cell and how the guard cell opens and closes. It opens during the daytime and it closes at night. And it's just that. It's like a door that lets things in and out of the leaf. We had our air space. What's the function of the air space? The air space is where the CO2 goes when it comes into the plant's leaf. Then we have our mesophyll cell. What is the function of the mesophyll cell? It's a house for the chloroplasts. Let's go to the chloroplasts. The chloroplasts are little pockets where photosynthesis occurs. And chlorophyll uses the sun to make its energy in the plant. We drew the layers, labeled with our vocabulary words, added the function. Next, we went back and we added any fancy words. We added some fancy words where needed. Notice we had hard, waxy for the cuticle, stiff for the walls, and any other parts of your description that you think need to have those sensory descriptive words to describe the different parts of, in this case, a leaf, you would add to the different vocabulary words. We have completed the body. We drew a picture, labeled the parts, told the function of the parts, and we added some describing words where needed. The last thing we're going to do is the conclusion. Notice S equal sign on the bottom where our conclusion is. That means we're going to repeat this definition, but use different words. We looked at our subject, a leaf. And instead of saying a leaf, we came up with this important part of a plant. And I just wrote a few of the keywords. Equal sign is made up of many layers. Instead of saying is made up of many layers, what's another way that I can define, give a definition or understanding of what this part of a plant is? So we looked at all the information and we said, yeah, we could have said that it has many layers, but let's add more to that definition. And we talked about how the leaf is where the plant is making its food. So we went back and said, this important part of the plant is a food-making factory. We have our introduction, we have our body, and we have our conclusion. We can orally rehearse this entire paper. A leaf is a special part of the plant and is made up of many layers. The top layer, oh, look at that. So I need to transition to my description. I could just say, first is the cuticle. Or I could say the outside or the top layer of a leaf is the hard, waxy cuticle that helps prevent moisture from leaking out of the plant. Oh, that's not bad. Or I could say, first is the cuticle. It is hard and waxy, so it keeps its shape and moisture. All right, so notice we're going back and we're orally rehearsing this entire description. My transitions could be first, next. So that means I'm going to have those words that tell me the order. Or I could have location transitions, because location transitions tell you in this visual drawing, because I'm using words to create a visual image in your head, I'm going to tell you where in the drawing you should be building this part of the image. So I could give you a location on the outside of the leaf or the top layer of the leaf, in the middle of the leaf, underneath the cuticle. So I could have location words. Or I could just begin with the vocabulary word itself. The guard cell opens during the day and closes at night. So you have ordinal words, location words, or you could just start with the vocabulary word in the descriptive part, the body of your essay. We go through and we orally rehearse our paper. We use different types of transitions in order to link up the different vocabulary words and what they mean so that we're describing this image, this visual representation to our reader. When you are describing this image, if you jump around, the reader's trying to build the image with your words and they're going to get lost. You want to give them a direction, a map in order to follow. So that means when I'm choosing my vocabulary words, I have to have a plan of which ones I'm going to choose first, and after that, and after that, and after that. I have to order them in a fashion. I could start from top to bottom. I could start from inside and go out. I could go from left to right, right to left. What are we going to do? And we decided we're going to start from the top and work down. So we're using that whole idea of starting at the top and building down, or more specifically, the outside going into the inside. When we started reading the description in the middle, we first had to figure out what order are we going to tell this description. Top, bottom, inside out, left, right, left, outside in, and we decided that we were going to start from the top and work down, or from the outside and work to the inside of the plant's leaf. Once we did that, then we were going to go to the first vocabulary word. And at that point, we had to figure out what transition words would work well here. Well, we could start with just first, or we could say on the outside of the leaf, the location, or just use the cuticle. We decided to say first. You could have on the outside. All your students don't have to use the same transition because when you're reading this, you can constantly switch and change your transitions as well. Let's go back and let's read the whole paper. Ready? A leaf is a special part of a plant and it has many layers. On the outside of the leaf is the cuticle. It's hard and waxy, so it keeps its shape and moisture inside. The next layer is the epidermis, which also keeps its shape and moisture. The inside part of a leaf are filled with air space that are like lungs to store CO2 for when the plant is ready to make its food. Also in the inner part of the plant are the mesophyll cells, which are like houses for the chloroplasts. The chloroplasts are areas in the mesophyll cells where photosynthesis occurs. Chlorophyll is what makes the plant's energy using the sun. This special part of a plant is like a food-making factory. So we went through, we orally rehearsed, we practiced this, and when kids can say it on their own, they write it out. Let's look at a student sample. A leaf has many layers. First is the cuticle. It is hard and waxy to keep its shape and moisture. Next is the epidermis, with its stiff cell walls that keep the plant shape and moisture inside. The inner part are the mesophyll cells that house the chloroplasts. The chloroplasts are like pockets that hold the chlorophyll. Chlorophyll uses the sun to make energy. This important part of a plant is a busy food-making factory. When the students are finished, I ask them to highlight their vocabulary words to show that they have them in their text. You can have an independent activity where they can take these vocabulary words and put them in a vocabulary wall that's specific to content. Let's turn to the next page so I can show you that example. This was an example of another content vocabulary wall. Early in the year, we identified what the different parts of speech were for our vocabulary words. We wrote A for adjective, N for noun, V for verb, so that the students could connect the idea of the parts of speech to their content words. Then they would record those words on a vocab wall. In this case, after the students had finished their content vocabulary organizer, they went to their student vocab wall. And this is a topic student vocab wall. This is only for words that are associated to plants. And they recorded their vocabulary words. They identified the parts of speech and they recorded them, and in this case they were nouns, in the noun column. Notice there are adjectives and verbs here. From other texts that we had read in our plant unit, we also identified different vocabulary words and recorded them on this vocab wall. This vocab wall is a valuable tool for you to have for your students. What I do is I make many copies of the vocab walls. I staple them together into what we call a content vocabulary walls book for each student. Then I take a Post-it and I divide this booklet in half. That means that in the first half, these are my content vocabulary words that the students have for their units of study in social studies. The Post-it is where we're going to have our vocab walls for our units of study in science. So this was science and it was about plants, and they went back and they filled in their content vocabulary wall independently. At the beginning of the year, we identified parts of speech, showed them how to do this, but this is now an independent activity where they fill in their wall. So later, when they go to write about plants, this is a handy vocabulary wall that they can have open to use for words in their own writing. You have a black line master on the following page in which you can make copies for your students. Let's go back to page 144. In order to ensure that students are writing across the curriculum, what do we need to do? We need to have them write all the time. But if they don't have the knowledge, no knowledge, we need to have activities that are going to provide them with content as well as writing instruction. We covered lecture notes for the content and taking them to writing that specifically work with organizing the writing in categories, a sequence, or cause and effect. And when we are dealing with vocabulary and also writing descriptions, we use content vocabulary diagrams. These are our different activities that integrate writing into the content so that your kids stay at grade level in content as well as learn how to write. The next videos are going to take you into the knowledge field. That means that you are well into this unit of study. Your students know, and in this case, about plants, so they are ready to be the givers of the information. So the students now, not the teacher, are going to be the givers of information. Our next video will focus on brainstorming. I will show you techniques to teach your students so they will be highly effective brainstormers. So it's not just a mess on the paper. You will teach them how to brainstorm in an effective way so that they are thinking and organizing their information to readily take to their planners and writing. So our next video will take us to brainstorming.